Washington, November 8, 2024. The Federal Reserve raised the benchmark interest rate by 0.25%, marking its fourth increase this year to combat high inflation. The Fed chair stated this measure aims to control rising prices and support economic stability. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched the stars through the main viewing screen. The ship moved through space at speeds that would have seemed impossible to his grandfather back on Earth. 3 years had passed since humanity first left their home system and discovered they were not alone in the galaxy. 3 years of war had followed that discovery. The communication console made a soft beeping sound. Lieutenant Katie Walsh turned from her station with wide eyes. "Captain, we have an incoming message from the Zephyrian Empire. It's marked as Priority 1 diplomatic correspondence." Morrison felt his stomach tighten. The Zephyrians never sent diplomatic messages during wartime. They preferred to communicate through weapons fire and destroyed ships. He walked over to the communication station and nodded to Walsh. "Put it through to the main screen." The image that appeared made everyone on the bridge step back. Emperor Vorthok himself filled the screen, his massive form covered in natural armor that looked like black metal. His forearms moved as he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of centuries of absolute power. "Captain Morrison of the human vessel Defiance, I am Emperor Vorthok, the Magnificent, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire and sovereign of 1,000 worlds. I extend to your species an invitation to attend a peace summit on the neutral station of Kepler Prime. Representatives from all major galactic powers will be present. You have 7 standard days to arrive." The message ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in silence. Commander Lisa Brady stepped forward from her position at the tactical station. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes held the same suspicion that Morrison felt. "This has to be a trap," Brady said. "The Zephyrians don't do peace summits, they do conquests and surrenders." Dr. Alex Parker looked up from his science station where he had been studying alien biological data. His glasses reflected the light from his console as he spoke. "Actually, Zephyrian culture does have provisions for formal peace negotiations, but only when they believe they have achieved total victory." Morrison felt a chill run through him. "Are you saying they think they've already won?" Parker pushed his glasses up his nose, a habit he had when delivering bad news. "The Emperor wouldn't call for a summit unless he was certain of the outcome. In Zephyrian culture, offering peace terms is a gesture of magnanimity from a position of absolute strength." Brady crossed her arms. "So they want us there to watch us surrender in front of the entire galaxy." The captain walked back to his command chair and sat down heavily. Through the viewing screen he could see the distant glow of Kepler Prime, the neutral trading station that had somehow managed to avoid being conquered by any major power. It served as a meeting place for species that normally shot at each other on sight. Sir Walsh called from her station. "I'm detecting massive fleet movements throughout this sector. Zephyrian ships, Nexari collective vessels, and hegemony trade fleets, they're all heading toward Kepler Prime." Morrison stood up again and began pacing. His crew watched him with the loyalty that came from 3 years of impossible victories against superior enemies. They had learned to trust his judgment, even when it seemed crazy. "The thing is," Morrison said, speaking more to himself than to his crew, "they might be right about having one. We've been fighting for 3 years with ships that are held together with spare parts and prayers. Our ammunition is running low, our supplies are almost gone, and Earth keeps asking when we're coming home." Brady stepped closer to him. "But Captain, we've won every major engagement. The Battle of Proxima Station, the rescue mission at Colony 7, the defense of the mining worlds. How can they think they've won when we keep beating them?" Morrison smiled grimly. "Because they measure victory differently than we do. We measure it in battles won and people saved. They measure it in total resources, industrial capacity, and long-term strategic position. And by those measurements, they're probably right." Dr. Parker cleared his throat. "There's something else to consider. The other major powers will be there too. The Nexari Collective and the hegemony of If we don't show up, we'll be seen as cowards. If we do show up, we might be walking into our formal surrender." The bridge fell quiet again as everyone considered their options. Morrison looked around at his crew, these brave men and women who had followed him across the galaxy and never questioned his orders. Walsh, at communications, barely 25 years old but with the steady nerves of a veteran. Brady at tactical, whose strategic mind had saved them more times than he could count. Parker at science, whose understanding of alien cultures had kept them from making fatal mistakes. "Set course for Kepler Prime," Morrison finally said. "Maximum speed." Brady looked concerned. "Captain, what are you planning?" Morrison settled back into his command chair and watched the stars shift as the ship changed course. I'm planning to accept their invitation, but that doesn't mean I'm planning to surrender. The UES Defiance turned toward its destination, carrying with it the hopes and fears of an entire species that had stumbled into a war they never asked for but could not afford to lose. The great hall of Kepler Prime stretched out before them like a cathedral made of crystal and starlight. Captain Morrison walked beside Commander Brady and Dr. Parker, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. Above them, the transparent dome showed the stars and the massive fleets that had gathered for this moment. Morrison had seen alien ships before, but never so many in one place. The Zephyrian fleet dominated the view with vessels that looked like black daggers against the stars. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built, and there were hundreds of them arranged in perfect formation. The Nexari ships looked different, more organic somehow, as if they had been grown rather than built. They moved in swarms, thousands of smaller vessels that acted as one mind. Dr. Parker had explained that the Nexari were a hive species, each ship controlled by the collective consciousness that governed their entire race. The hegemony vessels were the most colorful, painted in bright patterns that advertised their trade goods and corporate affiliations. They looked like floating cities, massive and complex, designed more for commerce than war, but still heavily armed. "Look at that," Brady whispered, pointing to a section of the hall where other species had gathered. Morrison followed her gaze, and saw representatives from dozens of worlds he had never heard of. Some walked on four legs, others floated in transparent spheres filled with gas. One group appeared to be made of living rock, moving slowly but steadily across the crystal floor. "Minor powers," Dr. Parker explained quietly. "Species that serve the major empires in various capacities. They're here to witness whatever happens next." At the center of the hall stood a raised platform where four throne-like chairs had been arranged. 3 were already occupied. Emperor Vorthok sat in the largest chair, his massive form making the others look small by comparison. His natural armor gleamed in the light from above, and his 4 arms rested on the arms of his throne with casual confidence. Taut to his right sat the Nexari Queen Voice, the individual chosen to speak for the collective consciousness. She appeared almost human, except for the additional arms and the strange way her eyes seemed to look in multiple directions at once. Behind her, Morrison could see hundreds of Nexari drones standing in perfect silence. The third chair held Trade Prince Calyx of the Hegemony, a being that looked like a cross between a lizard and a businessman. His scales were polished to a bright shine, and his clothing was expensive enough to buy a small planet. He watched the human delegation with obvious curiosity, as if trying to calculate their worth in credits. The fourth chair, smaller than the others, sat empty. Emperor Vorthok rose from his throne as the human delegation approached. His voice filled the hall without need for amplification, carrying the authority of 2,000 years of unchallenged rule. "Captain Morrison of Earth, you honor us with your presence. Please, take your place so that we may begin." Morrison looked at the empty chair and then back at the Emperor. The message was clear. Humanity was being offered a seat at the table, but it was obviously the smallest seat, positioned slightly behind the others. He walked forward and sat down, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes upon him. The chair was comfortable enough, but he could not shake the feeling that he was sitting in a trap. Emperor Vorthok gestured with all 4 arms as he began to speak. "We gather here today to end a conflict that has consumed precious resources and cost valuable lives. For 3 years, the galaxy has been at war. Today, we choose peace." The Emperor's voice grew stronger as he continued. "The Zephyrian Empire has ruled this galaxy for 2 millennia. We have brought order to chaos, peace to warring worlds, and prosperity to countless species. Our rule is not tyranny but guidance, not oppression but protection." Morrison noticed how the other species in the hall nodded along with the Emperor's words. Even the minor powers seemed to accept this version of galactic history without question. "That Nexari Collective serves as our industrial foundation," Vorthok continued, gesturing toward the Queen Voice. "Their efficiency and dedication have built the infrastructure that connects 1,000 worlds." The Queen Voice spoke in a voice that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. "The collective serves willingly, as individual thought leads only to chaos and suffering. Unity brings strength." Trade Prince Calyx was next. His voice had the smooth quality of a natural salesman. "The hegemony maintains the economic networks that keep goods and services flowing throughout known space. Commerce brings prosperity to all who participate." Emperor Vorthok turned his attention to Morrison. "And now we come to humanity. the newest addition to our galactic community. Your species has shown remarkable courage and ingenuity in these past 3 years. You have fought bravely against impossible odds and achieved victories that should not have been possible. Morrison remained silent, sensing that the Emperor was building toward something. However, Vorthok continued, "Courage alone cannot overcome the mathematics of war. You are one species against many. Your resources are limited while ours are vast. Your technology, while innovative, cannot match weapons perfected over centuries of conquest." The whole grew quiet as the Emperor prepared to deliver his terms. "Therefore, I offer your species the gift of survival. Humanity will be granted protectorate status under Zephyrian rule. Your worlds will contribute raw materials and agricultural products to the greater galactic economy. Your military vessels will be decommissioned, and your personnel will serve in support roles under proper supervision." Morrison felt Brady tense beside him, but he kept his own expression neutral. In return, the Emperor said, "Your species will be spared the destruction that awaits those who continue to resist galactic order. You will be allowed to maintain limited self-governance on your core worlds, subject to Imperial oversight." The Emperor sat back down on his throne and looked directly at Morrison. "This is a generous offer, Captain. More generous than any species in your position has ever received. I suggest you accept it gratefully." The hall waited in silence for humanity's response. Captain Morrison stood up slowly from his chair, and the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was on him as he walked forward to the center of the platform. His boots clicked against the crystal floor with each step, the sound echoing in the vast space above. Emperor Vorthok leaned forward slightly in his throne, expecting to hear words of gratitude and submission. The Nexari Queen voice tilted her head, calculating the probability of human compliance. Trade Prince Calyx smiled, already planning the commercial arrangements that would follow humanity's surrender. Morrison stopped in the center of the platform and looked up at the dome above them. Through the transparent ceiling, he could see the stars and the massive fleets waiting in space. So many ships, representing so much power, all gathered to witness what they believed would be humanity's inevitable capitulation. He lowered his gaze and looked directly at Emperor Vorthok. "Your Majesty, I want to thank you for your generous offer. It shows a wisdom and magnanimity that speaks well of your character and your empire." A murmur of approval rippled through the assembled delegates. The Emperor's expression softened slightly, and he nodded regally. This was proceeding exactly as expected. Morrison continued in the same calm tone. "You speak of 2,000 years of rule, of order brought to chaos, of peace imposed upon warring worlds. These are impressive achievements that command respect." Dr. Parker adjusted his glasses nervously. He could sense something building in his captain's words, a tension that the aliens in the hall had not yet noticed. "You offer humanity a place in this great galactic order," Morrison said, "a chance to survive under your protection, to contribute our resources and labor to the greater good as you define it." Commander Brady kept her face carefully neutral, but inside she was beginning to understand where this was heading. She had served with Morrison long enough to recognize the dangerous quiet in his voice. Morrison walked closer to the Emperor's throne, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that appeared respectful but ready. "The thing is, Your Majesty, I have a problem with your offer." The Emperor's 4 eyes narrowed slightly. This was not the script he had expected. "What problem could you possibly have with such generous terms?" Morrison smiled, but it was not a friendly expression. "The problem is that what you call peace, I call surrender. What you call protection, I call slavery. What you call order, I call the death of everything that makes life worth living." The hall erupted in shocked whispers and angry hisses. Several Zephyrian guards reached for their weapons before the Emperor's gesture stopped them. The Queen voice began making rapid calculations, her multiple voices overlapping in confusion. "You see," Morrison continued, his voice growing stronger, "humanity has learned something interesting about your galactic order during these past 3 years of war. We've learned that it's built on fear, not strength. We've learned that your subjects serve you not out of loyalty, but because they've forgotten what freedom looks like." Emperor Vorthok rose from his throne, his massive form towering over the human captain. "You dare insult the Zephyrian Empire in my presence?" Morrison looked up at the Emperor without flinching. "I'm not insulting your empire, Your Majesty. I'm simply declining your offer." The words hit the hall like a physical blow. In 2,000 years of Zephyrian rule, no species had ever rejected imperial terms so directly. The very concept was beyond the comprehension of most beings present. "You're refusing our protection?" the Emperor asked, his voice carrying deadly menace. "I'm refusing your chains," Morrison replied. Humanity didn't travel to the stars to become servants to another species, no matter how powerful or ancient. We came here to be free. Trade Prince Calix leaned forward in his chair. Captain, you cannot be serious. Your species numbers in the billions. The combined fleets above us could turn every human world to ash within a solar cycle. Morrison turned to face the Trade Prince. You're probably right about that. But here's what you don't understand about humans. We'd rather die free than live as slaves. The Queen voice spoke, her multiple voices creating an eerie harmony. Freedom is an illusion. The collective provides purpose, direction, meaning. Individual will leads only to chaos and suffering, maybe, Morrison said, walking over to face her. But chaos is at least honest. Your collective consciousness, the Emperor's absolute rule, the hegemony's corporate control, they're all just different ways of telling people that their thoughts and dreams don't matter. He turned back to address the entire hall, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. 3 years ago, humanity discovered we weren't alone in the universe. We were excited to meet other intelligent species, to learn from them, to build something together that none of us could achieve alone. Expression hardened. Instead, we found a galaxy where power comes from the ability to crush others, where peace means submission, and where the strong decide the fate of the weak without asking their opinion. Emperor Vorthok's voice thundered through the hall. And what would you have instead, human? What system would you propose to replace millennia of proven governance? Morrison smiled again, and this time there was genuine warmth in the expression. I'd propose something radical, Your Majesty. I'd propose that we try asking people what they want instead of telling them what they need. I'd propose that we build a galaxy where different species work together as equals rather than as masters and servants. Impossible, the Emperor declared. Without central authority, there is only chaos. Maybe, Morrison admitted, but at least it would be our chaos to make or unmake as we choose. The captain walked back to the center of the platform and looked up at the dome again. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of an entire species' determination. So here's humanity's counter-proposal. Your Majesty, we'll gladly make peace with you and anyone else who wants it. But it will be peace between equals, not submission. 2 superiors will trade with you, learn from you, even fight alongside you if the cause is just. But we will not bow to you. Morrison looked directly into Emperor Vorthok's 4 eyes. And if that's not acceptable to you, then I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree. The hall fell completely silent as the implications of his words sank in. War would continue, but now it had a completely different meaning than anyone had expected. For several heartbeats, the great hall of Kepler Prime remained frozen in absolute silence. Then Emperor Vorthok's roar of rage shattered the quiet like breaking glass. His forearms slammed against the arms of his throne as he rose to his full, imposing height. You insolent creature, the Emperor bellowed. Do you have any comprehension of what you have just done? No species in the history of this galaxy has dared to speak such words to Zephyrian authority. Morrison stood calmly in the center of the platform, his hands still clasped behind his back. The rage radiating from the massive alien ruler washed over him like heat from a furnace, but he did not step back or show any sign of fear. I have a pretty good idea, Your Majesty, Morrison replied in the same steady tone he had maintained throughout his speech. I've just told the most powerful being in the galaxy that humanity refuses to surrender. The Nexari Queen voice began making rapid clicking sounds, her multiple consciousness processing thousands of possible outcomes simultaneously. This does not compute, she said, her overlapping voices creating an eerie chorus. Species survival. Probability decreases to near zero with such a choice. Logic demands submission to superior force. Dr. Parker cleared his throat nervously but spoke with surprising firmness. That's where you're wrong about humans. We don't always choose the logical path. Sometimes we choose the right path, even when logic says it's impossible. Trade Calix had been frantically calculating on a small device throughout the exchange. Now he looked up with genuine confusion in his reptilian features. Captain Morrison, the economic mathematics of your position are completely unsustainable. Even if your species possessed unlimited courage, you lack the industrial base to maintain a prolonged conflict against the combined galactic powers. Commander Brady stepped forward to stand beside her. Captain, you're making the same mistake everyone else has made about humans. You think this is about mathematics and logic and resource allocation. She gestured toward the dome above them where the massive alien fleets waited in space. All those ships up there, all that firepower, all that technology, you think it makes you strong, but you've forgotten something important. And what might that be? Emperor Vorthok demanded, his voice still carrying the edge of barely controlled fury. Brady smiled, and her expression held the same dangerous confidence that had made her such an effective tactical officer. You've forgotten what it feels like to fight for something you actually believe in. The Emperor's four eyes narrowed. We fight for order, for stability, for the preservation of galactic civilization. No, Morrison said, stepping forward again. You fight to maintain your power. The Nexari fight because they've been programmed to obey. The hegemony fights for profit margins. But none of you fight for ideals anymore, do you? He began walking around the platform, addressing each delegation in turn. When was the last time any of your species took a risk for something other than personal gain? When did you last sacrifice something valuable for a principle rather than a practical advantage? Morrison stopped in front of the Emperor's throne. You've all become so focused on what you can take from others that you've forgotten what it means to stand for something worth defending. Emperor Vorthok leaned down until his face was only inches from Morrison's. His breath was hot and carried the scent of ozone and metal. And you believe your primitive ideals will protect you from the reality of superior force. Morrison looked up into those alien eyes without blinking. I believe that superior force without superior purpose eventually defeats itself. How many rebellions have you faced in 2,000 years of rule, Your Majesty? How many worlds have tried to throw off your control? The Emperor's expression flickered for just a moment, and Morrison caught the hesitation. I thought so, the captain continued. And each time, you've crushed them with overwhelming power and told yourself it was necessary for the greater good, but you've never asked yourself why they keep rebelling, have you? The Queen voice clicked rapidly. Rebellions are statistical anomalies. Individual consciousness creates irrational desires for autonomy that conflict with optimal collective function. Morrison turned to face her. Or maybe rebellions happen because thinking beings naturally resist being told that their thoughts and dreams don't matter. He walked back to the center of the platform and spread his arms wide, addressing the entire hall. Look around you. Look at all the species represented here. How many of them chose to be part of your galactic order? How many were asked if they wanted protection, or were they simply told they needed it? Murmurs began to ripple through the assembled delegates. Some of the minor species representatives were looking at each other with expressions that hadn't been there before. Trade Prince Calyx shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The current system has brought unprecedented prosperity to all participating worlds. Trade networks span the galaxy. Resources flow efficiently. Conflicts are minimized. For who? Morrison challenged. Prosperity for the species at the top of the hierarchy. Resources flowing upward to support imperial ambitions. Conflicts minimized by crushing anyone who disagrees with the system. The captain's voice grew stronger as he warmed to his theme. You've created a galaxy where peace means silence, where order means obedience, and where prosperity means knowing your place and staying in it. Emperor Vorthok slammed his fist against his throne again. Enough. Your words change nothing. Your species still faces the same choice, surrender or destruction. Morrison smiled one more time, and this expression carried something that made several aliens in the hall step backward. Actually, Your Majesty, you're wrong about that too. We're not choosing between surrender and destruction. He paused, letting the tension build. We're choosing between slavery and freedom, and for humans, that's not really a choice at all. Morrison walked toward the edge of the platform where his delegation waited. The meeting is over, Your Majesty. Thank you for your offer, but humanity respectfully declines. As the three humans began to leave the platform, Emperor Vorthok's voice followed them. You will regret this decision, Captain Morrison. The full might of the Zephyrian Empire will fall upon your worlds. Morrison stopped and looked back over his shoulder. Maybe we will regret it, Your Majesty, but at least we'll regret it as free beings. The human delegation walked out of the Great Hall, leaving behind a galaxy that would never be quite the same again. The Great Hall of Kepler Prime erupted into chaos the moment the human delegation disappeared through the exit. Emperor Vorthok's roar of fury echoed off the crystal walls as he swept one of his massive arms across a nearby control panel, sending sparks flying in all directions. Seal the station, he commanded. No one leaves until I give permission. His guards moved immediately to carry out the order, but Trade Prince Calyx raised a scaled hand. Your Majesty, with respect, this is a neutral station operating under commercial law. Sealing it would violate numerous trade agreements and could destabilize the entire sector economy. The Emperor turned his four eyes on the Trade Prince with an expression that could have melted steel. Are you questioning my authority? Galax maintained his composed businessman demeanor despite the obvious threat. I'm simply pointing out the practical complications of such an action. The hegemony has significant investments in this facility. The Nexari Queen voice began making rapid, clicking sounds as thousands of calculations ran through the collective consciousness. Emperor Vorthok, the humans departed under diplomatic immunity protocols. Violation of these protocols would damage Zephyrian credibility with neutral powers and could complicate future negotiations. Emperor Vorthok stood motionless for several moments, his breathing creating a sound like distant thunder. Around the hall, representatives from dozens of minor species watched nervously as the most powerful being in the galaxy struggled to control his rage. Very well, he finally said through clenched teeth. But I want those humans monitored. Every transmission they send, every course change their ship makes, every breath they take, I want to know about it. Meanwhile, aboard the UES Defiance, Captain Morrison sat in his command chair as Lieutenant Walsh worked frantically at the communications console. The bridge hummed with activity as the crew prepared for immediate departure from Kepler Prime. Captain, I'm detecting massive fleet movements. Commander Brady reported from her tactical station. The Zephyrian ships are taking up attack formations. Morrison nodded grimly. Any sign they're targeting us specifically? Not yet, but they're definitely not happy. I'm reading weapons signatures, powering up across their entire fleet. Dr. Parker looked up from his science station where he had been monitoring alien communications. Captain, I'm picking up some interesting chatter from the minor species delegations. Several of them are transmitting coded messages to their home worlds. What kind of messages? Parker adjusted his glasses as he studied the data. It's hard to be certain without better translation protocols, but some of them appear to be reporting what happened in the hall, and sir, the tone doesn't sound like they're condemning our actions. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Are you saying some of them agreed with what we did? It's possible. Remember, most of these species didn't choose to join the Galactic Order. They were conquered or coerced into it. Hearing someone openly defy the Emperor might have given them ideas. Lieutenant Walsh turned from her station with excitement in her voice. Captain, you need to hear this. I've been monitoring communications from the Nexari fleet, and something strange is happening. Define strange. Some of their ships are broadcasting on frequencies that aren't part of the collective network. Individual Nexari drones appear to be communicating independently of the hive mind. Commander Brady looked up from her tactical display. That's not possible. The Nexari have been a collective consciousness for thousands of years. Dr. Parker was already running calculations on his console. Actually, it might be more possible than we think. The collective consciousness requires constant reinforcement through neural network connections. If individual drones start questioning the system, it could create feedback loops that disrupt the entire network. Morrison stood up and began pacing the bridge. So you're telling me that our little speech in there might have convinced some Nexari to start thinking for themselves? It's a possibility, Parker replied, though the implications are staggering. If the Nexari collective begins to fragment, it could destabilize the entire galactic power structure. Back on Kepler Prime, Emperor Vorthok was discovering exactly how destabilizing human defiance could be. He sat alone in his private chambers aboard his flagship, staring at reports that made less sense with each passing hour. His chief military advisor, General Krex, stood at attention before the Emperor's desk. The general's natural armor was scarred from countless battles, but his expression showed confusion rather than confidence. Your Majesty, we're receiving contradictory reports from across the Empire. Several client species are requesting clarification of their status within the Imperial hierarchy. What kind of clarification? General Krex consulted his datapad nervously. They want to know if they have the right to withdraw from Imperial protection if they choose to do so. Emperor Vorthak's forehands clenched into fists. Since when do client species question their status? Since approximately 3 hours ago, Your Majesty. The questions began arriving shortly after news of the Peace Summit spread through the communication networks. The Emperor stood up and walked to the viewing port of his chambers. Outside he could see his massive fleet arranged in perfect formation. A display of power that had intimidated countless species into submission. But for the first time in his long reign, he wondered if raw power was enough. What about the next Nexari? He asked. General Krex's expression grew even more troubled. That's our most serious concern, Your Majesty. We're detecting significant disruptions in their collective network. Several industrial worlds have gone silent, and some Nexari ships are operating independently of Central Command. The Emperor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in his chambers. The Nexari Collective had been the foundation of Zephyrian power for centuries. Their perfect obedience and industrial efficiency had made imperial expansion possible on a galactic scale. How many ships? Unknown, Your Majesty. They're using encrypted communications that we can't decode. But our intelligence estimates suggest the number is growing. Emperor Vorthok turned away from the viewing port and fixed his advisor with a stare that had made veteran warriors tremble. Find me solutions, General. I don't care what it takes. The humans have started something dangerous, and it ends now. General Krex saluted and left the chambers, but both he and the Emperor knew that some things, once started, could not be easily stopped. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had been silent for centuries, beings who had almost forgotten what it meant to choose their own destiny began to remember. The human captain's words were spreading through underground communication networks, translated into hundreds of languages and adapted to dozens of different cultures. The message was simple, but revolutionary. You have the right to say no. For an empire built on the assumption that might makes right, it was the most dangerous idea in the universe. 6 months after the failed peace summit, Captain Morrison stood on the observation deck of the UES Defiance and watched something that would have been impossible to imagine a year earlier. Through the transparent aluminum viewport, he could see a mixed fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. That human ships flew in formation, with vessels that had once belonged to the Nexari Collective. The organic curves of the alien craft looked strange beside the angular lines of human engineering, but they moved together with a coordination that spoke of trust earned through shared struggle. Commander Brady joined him at the viewport, her tactical scanner in hand. The latest intelligence reports just came in from the hegemony border worlds. 3 more trade prince territories have declared independence from central authority. Morrison nodded without surprise. The galaxy had been transforming itself for months now, though not in ways anyone could have predicted. Any word from the Zephyrian core worlds? Emperor Vorthok is consolidating his forces around the imperial capital. Our sources suggest he's facing open rebellion on over 200 worlds. Dr. Parker approached from the science station, his excitement barely contained. Captain, you need to see this data from the former Nexari industrial worlds. The productivity reports are fascinating. Morrison turned from the viewport. How so? Parker activated a holographic display that showed production statistics from dozens of worlds. When the Nexari Collective began fragmenting, everyone expected industrial output to collapse. Individual consciousness was supposed to lead to chaos and inefficiencies, and production has actually increased by 30% across most sectors. It turns out that when people are working for themselves instead of being forced to work for others, they're more creative, more motivated, and more willing to innovate. Brady smiled. Who would have thought that happy workers are productive? Workers. Through the ship's communication system, Lieutenant Walsh's voice reached them from the bridge. Captain Morrison, we're receiving a transmission from the former Nexari Queen Voice. She's requesting permission to come aboard. Morrison exchanged glances with his officers. The Queen Voice had been one of the first Nexari to break free from the collective consciousness, and she had become something of a symbol for the independence movement spreading across former collective worlds. Tell her she's welcome aboard, Morrison replied. 20 minutes later, the being who had once spoken for billions of minds sat across from Morrison in his ready room. She looked different now, somehow more individual than she had at the peace summit. Her eyes focused on single objects instead of looking in multiple directions, and her voice came from one throat instead of many. Captain Morrison, she said, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did on Kepler Prime. Morrison poured 2 cups of coffee, offering one to his guest. She accepted it with curiosity, sniffing the aroma before taking a careful sip. I didn't do anything except refuse to surrender, Morrison said. You're the one who chose to think for yourself. The former Queen Voice considered this choice such a simple concept, yet it changed everything. For thousands of years, my people believed that individual thought led only to chaos and suffering. We were wrong. How are your people adapting to independence? Better than anyone expected. There was chaos at first, certainly. When billions of minds suddenly have to make their own decisions after millennia of collective thought, confusion is inevitable. But something wonderful happened. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. We discovered that we're not just workers or drones. We're engineers, artists, explorers, teachers. We have individual talents and dreams that the collective never recognized or valued. Morrison smiled. And the industrial worlds? transforming rapidly. Without the collective dictating every action, our people are free to innovate. They're developing new technologies, creating art, even writing poetry. Some have chosen to leave their birth worlds and explore the galaxy. Through the viewport of the ready room, Morrison could see one of the mixed patrol groups returning from a scouting mission. Human and former Nexari ships moved together in a dance of cooperation that would have been unthinkable under the old Galactic Order. What about Emperor Vorthok? Morrison asked. The former Queen voice's expression grew serious. He's not adapting well to the changes. Intelligence reports suggest he's becoming increasingly desperate. Some of our sources indicate he's planning something called Operation Final Authority. Morrison felt a chill. Any details? Not many. But the name suggests he intends to reassert Imperial control through overwhelming force. He still has the loyalty of the core Zephyrian worlds and their military fleets. Before Morrison could respond, the ship's alarm began sounding. Walsh's voice came through the communication system with urgent news. Captain, to the bridge immediately. We're receiving distress calls from the Kepler system. Morrison and the former Queen voice hurried to the bridge, where they found the crew working frantically at their stations. The main viewing screen showed long-range sensor data from Kepler. Prime, report, Morrison ordered. Brady turned from her tactical station with grim news. A massive Zephyrian fleet just jumped into the Kepler system. They're demanding that all non-Imperial vessels surrender immediately or be destroyed. Dr. Parker looked up from his science console. Captain Kepler Prime has been serving as a refugee center for beings fleeing Imperial worlds. There are thousands of civilians on that station, Walsh called out from communications. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Emperor Vorthok himself. He's demanding to speak with you personally. Morrison took a deep breath. Put him through. The main screen flickered and then showed the familiar imposing figure of Emperor Vorthok. His four eyes burned with rage, and his natural armor seemed to gleam with deadly purpose. Captain Morrison, the Emperor said, his voice carrying across space like a weapon. Your rebellion ends today. Surrender now, and I will spare the civilians on Kepler Prime. Continue to resist, and I will demonstrate what happens to those who defy Zephyrian authority. Morrison stepped forward, his crew standing behind him in silent support. Emperor Vorthok, those civilians have done nothing except exercise their right to choose their own destiny. They chose to defy Imperial authority. The consequences are on your head. Human. Morrison looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew, then at the former Queen voice who represented millions of beings who had chosen freedom over security. Your Majesty, Morrison said finally, I told you 6 months ago that humanity would not bow to your authority. That hasn't changed, but I'll make you a new offer. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. You are in no position to make offers. Morrison smiled, and his expression carried the same dangerous confidence that had changed the galaxy. I offer you the same choice we've given everyone else. Your Majesty, you can continue to rule through fear and force, fighting rebellions that will never end, or you can try something revolutionary, which is, you can try ruling through consent. You can ask your subjects what they want instead of telling them what they need. You can discover what it means to be a leader instead of just a conqueror. Emperor Vorthok was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2,000 years of absolute power. Never. Morrison nodded sadly. Then I guess we'll have to agree to disagree. Again, the transmission ended, and Morrison turned to his crew. Walsh, signal all allied vessels. It's time to show the Emperor what happens when free beings fight for something they believe in. The used Defiance turned toward Kepler Prime, leading a fleet of ships crewed by beings who had chosen to stand together against tyranny. Behind them came vessels from dozens of worlds, carrying people who had decided that freedom was worth fighting for. The final battle for the soul of the galaxy was about to begin.